Well, the director of the New Orleans 911 Center, Tyrell Morris, remains on the job as of now as the board continues to discuss his fate.
And the board met in executive session for hours concerning whether Morris changed the department's take-home car policy after he was in a car wreck with a city-owned vehicle. Natasha Robin has this story.
The board recognized the gravity of the current situation and the need.
For hours behind closed doors, the Orleans Parish Communication District Commission met in executive session, discussing the fate of its executive director, Tyrell Morris.
It's also important to note that
the 911 director is under investigation for his actions after an accident in early May involving his city-owned vehicle. Questions have been raised about whether Morris altered the OPCD policy on take-home vehicles. Morris did not take a drug or alcohol test after the crash and left the crash site after allegedly exchanging information with the other driver.
No further comment, thanks.
Board members had little to say leaving the meeting, but chairman of the Communication District, John Thomas, said they consider it a grave situation. He went on to say they need additional information before taking any action.
For this reason, the board plans to spend the next 72 hours compiling and synthesizing all additional information needed and meet again on Tuesday.
3 Orleans state representatives also sat in on the executive session out of concern about what's going on.
There's state law that allows us to sit in on these executive sessions.
And I believe that the board has the citizens of New Orleans' best interest at heart, and the reason I was there is to hear what was happening.
I was very concerned about it. I'm very glad to see that the board is taking this extremely seriously.
Longtime board member Dr. Brobson Lutz said before the meeting he believed Morris should no longer lead the 911 Commission.
Personally, I think that the 911 Commission is in a crisis. We're in a crisis mode. We need new leadership.
Board member Thomas and the Office of Inspector General are investigating, and council members Helena Moreno and J.P. Morrell sent a letter on Wednesday to Thomas.
We believe that Director Morris needs to be suspended due to the severity of the allegations that he's facing, including the fact that these are criminal allegations that he's facing.
I think they're going to be looking to take some steps.
The board says they'll meet again on Tuesday, and the state representatives say they'll be here as well. In New Orleans, Natasha Robin, Fox 8, Local First.